Enslaved Rhode Islanders were the center of the destruction of slavery in the North. And they did so through running away, through fighting in the Revolutionary War, and in bargaining for their freedom. One of the letters I have up here is from a sailor by the name of Benjamin Freebody, who basically is writing his enslaver, reminding him that, remember, you said that you would free me after this time, and remember, you say you're a good Christian, and remember, you're supposed to free me, and remember, Christians aren't supposed to lie, right? And so from running away to serving in the military to writing persuasive letters to petition, if it may please God, be something of a terror to others for perpetrating of the like barbarity in the future, end quote. I know that's really graphic. I know we are virtually or physically in a church, but that is slavery. There's no nice way to talk about it. In 1714, a mulatto man ran away from the city of Newport. In 1728, Jethro, an enslaved Negro man, stole a canoe from his enslaver Robert Wilcox, a yeoman of Kingston, and paddled to Martha's Vineyard and, quote, hid among the Indians. In 1734, Hezekiah Gorton's Negro man was found guilty of poisoning two white women, and Rebecca French with contaminated apples and milk, and was ordered. Black people are never content with their bondage, right? They are labeled literally troublesome property. On July 28, 1725, in Newark, Hagar, an enslaved Negro woman, was willed 10 shillings. Her children were bequeathed 5 shillings each. Their enslaver, Captain Peter Green, left Hagar and her children money to, and I quote, induce her to be kind to my wife, end quote. In 1749, Joseph Wanton bequeathed all his Negroes to his son Edward. There was, however, a catch. He allowed those who were, and I quote, not willing to live with him, end quote, to live with his daughters instead. But his daughters, and I quote, decline taking such Negroes or Negro that want to be sold, end quote. Then they shall, and I quote, have the liberty of choosing a master or mistress that will buy them, provided they will give a good price, end quote. In 1772, Christopher Gardner testified that Moll, an enslaved woman who was held by his brother, scalded his nephew to death, but she was never prosecuted. These circumstances raise intriguing questions. Why would an enslaver leave his human property, what appears to be a bribe? Did Hagar and her children receive their money when Green died? And were they kind to his wife? Why did Wanton allow them to choose their own enslavers? Did they remain with his sons or elect to live with his daughters? Or did his daughters sell them? Why did Gardner not prosecute Moll for murder, especially since his brother witnessed the alleged crime? Did Gardner punish Moll himself? Did Moll continue to serve the family, or was she sold? Most of these questions are impossible to answer, but they serve as a reminder that slavery was a contested relationship and that enslaved people, while horribly oppressed, were not powerless. The Green, Wanton, and Gardner families had held people as property for generations. These experienced enslavers most likely understood that slave management included concessions to enslaved people. As famed historian Ira Berlin argued, slavery was indeed a contested, negotiated relationship. The business of slavery in Rhode Island dictated geographic patterns of slaveholding in the colony, as well as the work done by enslaved people. Enslaved people in the North did not produce a staple crop. Instead, their labors helped sustain a multitude of enslaved people that cultivated cash crops elsewhere in the Americas. And just as the growth of the plantation transformed Black life in the South, laboring in the business of slavery transformed Black life in the North, and in Rhode Island in particular. Prior to white Rhode Islanders' commitment to Atlantic commerce in the first decades of the 18th century, the enslaved population was relatively small, scattered, and predominantly indigenous. However, as the West Indian and Atlantic trades became the cornerstone of the local economy, more and more enslaved people of African descent were brought into the colony. Moreover, those larger webs of trading determined the places where enslaved people lived and dictated the work they performed. Most enslaved people in rural areas lived on large farms with 3 or 4 other enslaved people of African or native descent, as well as white indentured servants. In the countryside, especially in the Narragansett country, these bound people labored as cow herders, shepherds, and dairy farmers. They produced small amounts of grains, vegetables, cheese, and fish. Most enslaved people in urban areas were either the only or one of 2 bound people in a household. In the coastal cities of Newport and Providence and Warwick and Bristol, they labored as domestics, tradesmen, manufacturers, day laborers, and shopkeepers. The cumulative labor of all these enslaved people across the colony undergirded the buying and selling of people and goods on both sides of the Atlantic. The agency of many enslaved people countered the attempts of their enslavers to view and treat them as commodities. While there are few sources that reveal the day-to-day experience of enslaved people, combing the public record and private documents allows for a reasonable conjecture about their lives. Census data, court records, correspondence, private papers, estate and business records of slaveholders shed light on the activities of the enslaved, while also highlighting the challenges they faced as inheritable and contested property. White merchants, tradesmen, farmers, and slave traders who carried out the business of slavery in colonial Rhode Island were not just businessmen, but active participants in the development and maintenance of American slavery, a system that attempted unsuccessfully to dehumanize people of African descent. Many enslaved Rhode Islanders took advantage of the fact that their labors often mirrored that of whites. They assisted their enslavers in various businesses and were routinely rented out as tradesmen and sailors. These positions afforded them an increased opportunity to challenge the institution of slavery. Yet the resistance of most enslaved people in Rhode Island had very little to do with the business of slavery. Their opposition was not an attack on the business of slavery. Instead, they sought to free themselves and their families and their communities. However, their resistance and lived experiences are critical to understanding how modern American slavery was contested at every angle. Whether enslaved people found themselves laboring on vast plantations, small and large farms, in cities, on ships, or in shops, they ran away, they lobbied for their freedom, they strove to build full lives within the confines of slavery. Enslaved Rhode Islanders, like their counterparts throughout the Americas, refused to be simple property. In 1673, Negro servants, Maria and George, were indicted for fornicating. They were both found guilty and sentenced to 15 stripes. So they were whipped 15 times each.